Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation over in the Let's Talk Near Death online community, which is found at www.letstalkneardeath.com. Membership is free, or you're welcome to upgrade to join the live VIP events, to gain early access to episodes, or to receive extra VIP bonus material. Your support helps me to continue to get episodes out and to help grow the conversation around these types of experiences. But before then, let's talk near death.
By the time I got to Israel, I was having a problem in my stomach, and I was put in groin and pelvic area, and I was putting it down consistently to having drunk contaminated water. I was feeling very, very like I'd been poisoned on the inside. I was struggling to breathe. I would say I was also in toxic shock. I felt instinctively that if I lay down, I wouldn't survive. It was kind of like I went out through the top of my head, and I was hovering above my head, and but then I completely didn't even think about having a body anymore.
So Paulina Howfield, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. It's fabulous to have you here.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. It's a pleasure to be with you too.
Can you take us back? Can you let us know what was going on in your life? How did your near-death experience take place, and where did this all start?
Well, I was a seeker, a spiritual seeker for a long time when I was younger, and I was also traveling. I'm a traveler from many lifetimes, and I had been in Turkey for 4 months, I think, maybe longer, and I travelled down to Israel to work in a community there. And on the way from Turkey to Israel, I bought some bottled water, as you do, and I think the bottled water was contaminated. So by the time I got to Israel, I was having a problem in my stomach, and I was put in groin and pelvic area, and I was putting it down consistently to having drunk contaminated water. And I was on a spiritual community. It was an anthroposophical steiner community. I was really feeling close to spirit, close to God. I was really in my own psyche having a sense of that idea of ancient history living through me, that Jesus on the cross, different people who had come for spirituality in that place. And the olive trees were fantastic in the sunlight. So I was having something going on inside of me that was connecting me at a different level. This rumbling thing was going on inside me, and I thought I've got to do something about it. So I went to a doctor. The doctor referred me to a specialist. I saw the gynecologist, and he said to me, "You have a cyst on an ovary. It's quite large." In fact, it was very large. It could rupture at any moment, and you need to be careful. And if it ruptures, get to a hospital straight away. So I left the appointment, and I remember thinking to myself, well, how would I know if it ruptured? Like, what will happen? And so that I can be ready for it. And it turns out it wasn't something I had to try and figure out at all. So later that day, actually at 10 o'clock that night, it ruptured. And so I was feeling very, very like I'd been poisoned on the inside. I was struggling to breathe. I would say I was also in toxic shock. And I knew this was probably that the cyst had ruptured. And I also had searing pain in my pelvic area. So I was fortunate that there was a woman because I was as a volunteer in this community, so we had accommodation and we just worked in the community. I was fortunate that someone that I was sharing with at that time spoke English as well. She went off to get somebody from the community to try to get me to the hospital, which was about 35 minutes away. And she found a nurse who then said there was a student doctor in the community. So the student doctor went to get the car, the nurse came to get me, and then we got to the car. We had a discussion about who would sit where and what would happen. The driver was the doctor, or student doctor. The nurse was in the front seat. I was in the back. I'm quite tall, so I couldn't lay on the back seat. But the nurse she was wanting me to lay on the back seat. She felt it would be more comfortable. I felt instinctively that if I lay down, I wouldn't survive. Mm. And I struggled to get as comfortable as I could. And so I had my feet resting on the driver's side door. So I'm in Israel, which is European. So my feet are on the right-hand side. My body's on the left side of the car, my head. And I was resting on the window. My head, I was just really appreciating the cold of the glass because my body felt so hot and so unwell. Mm. So I was sort of resting with my head on the glass as we drove off to the hospital. And it was a dark night. It was a very starry night. And I looked up at the stars and I thought, this is a really beautiful night. And I was focusing on breathing and just allowing this, I guess, this toxic feel and the pain and the difficulty in breathing. I was just allowing it to do its thing without panicking or anything like that. And then I felt this and saw this thing at the top of my head and third eye, which was a blue eye. And the blue eye pulled me out. It was kind of like I went out through the top of my head and I was hovering above my head. And but then I completely didn't even think about having a body anymore. Mm. And I was out in space. Well, firstly, I was about, I would say, maybe 100 foot, 200 foot, or not 100, maybe it was 1,000 feet, but I was above, so I could see the car and I could see the people in the car and I could see my body in the back. And then I could see the tree lines and I could see the road. And then I suddenly shot out further and I was higher in space and I could see the villages in the distance because it was night. They were lit up. The roads, you could see the lights along the roads. Then I shot out again and I was even higher. I could see the whole planet and I could see the curve of the earth and I could see all the different lights around the planet. Mm. And then I shot out again and I was in space. And it was pretty amazing that I was in space. I could see the curves of the planet. As I said, I could see other planets. And I could sort of hear and feel wind, and I could hear noises which I would now say would be the audible life stream. So there was a bit of, it was kind of harmonious, but it can also be a bit discordant. So noises of space, moans and groans, and but it was actually space. It wasn't any human noises. It was hard to describe. You can tell that by the way that I'm trying to describe it.
That's okay. There might not be any words for that.
And that's the thing about our experiences, that they're not always the easiest thing to describe. Mm. So going out into that, into space, and I remember thinking, wow, if anyone asked me a question, I know the answer to that question. And it was a really wondrous thing to have in my perception, like, oh, wow, there's this real sense of a knowingness. And as I was having that sense, I felt the energy of air whip through my body. It was, although I wasn't a body, it was like it had whipped through my body. And it kind of took my breath away, the way the wind would if you suddenly had too much wind. coming through your body. And then water rushed through, and fire and earth. And each element had a really profound impact on my body, my consciousness, let's say. And I became aware in that moment that we're made of these 4 elements plus ether. And these are the building blocks of matter in consciousness. So I was having that experience, and then I became aware that I was in like a corridor of light, but it was on a cloud base, I guess. So I'm in space. I'm not really walking on clouds, but it would be kind of like that. But there was just this amazing light. It was all filled with very great light. Mm. And there were doors off these corridors, and some of them were swinging without any sort of sense of being still. And others, I felt that if I just concentrated on each door, each one of those had information for me. It was like Akashic records, I guess you'd say, or the doorways to other things that had happened on the planet, in the cosmos. So this was all really wondrous, but I was also recognizing I was in this ocean of consciousness. And I felt really at home. I felt really at peace. I felt like I really belonged. I felt unconditional love that was profound and eternal. Mm. And I was thinking I'd come home and I was going to stay there. And then I felt something tugging on my body, and I shot back into my body, and I became aware that the nurse in the front seat was trying to get my pulse. She was panicking because she couldn't feel a pulse. And so she had tried my wrist, she'd felt my wrist, and that's when she had felt there wasn't a pulse. And the doctor said, reach through and see if you can get a pulse around her neck, and that's what she was trying to do at that time when I shot back in. And they then had a discussion about how far it was still to the hospital, and he said we were close, and I think it was probably about 5 minutes away. And then I got to the hospital and I was seen in an emergency situation. And then over the next 2 to 3 days, I kept leaving, and I couldn't stay in. And I'd go off into this place and then was trying to stay. And I knew that I instinctively knew things, as you do. When you, excuse me, you don't even know that you know things sometimes, and you do. Yeah. And I knew that my oversoul or overself couldn't stay in my body. Something had happened in the process of the near-death experience that changed the frequencies and changed my understanding and level of consciousness. And so my oversoul, overself couldn't stay in. And I just knew that I needed water. And it wasn't so much water inside, it was water outside. So I'd had a conversation with one of the nurses, and I'd also, I'd leave and then someone would come in and touch my body, and then I'd know that it was, that I was back again. It was that same principle that had happened in the car. And she said, you're going to become dehydrated and you need to drink. And I thought, I don't need, like I said, I don't need water on the inside, I need water on the outside. So the room I was in, there was a shower or bathroom about probably 100 feet away, and I didn't have the capacity to walk, so I sort of dragged myself across the floor, very dramatic manner, but it didn't feel dramatic at the time, just felt it's what I needed to do. Got into the bathroom, turned the tap on, and sat on the floor of the bath, or the shower, and just let the water come over. And as the water came over, I knew that you know how water changes frequencies, and water is a frequency and consciousness of its own. I knew that that was actually repairing and helping. And so once I had that, I could feel my overself, oversoul finding its way in. I could feel that it was that the reparation was happening and that I was going to survive it. And that doesn't mean that I was concerned during all of this that I was going to die. It was that I was aware that I could.
Right. Yeah.
And then I began the process of getting well, and getting well enough to return to the UK from Israel. And then also during the near death, I'd become really aware of, I was a backpacker, so I carried my belongings on my back, and I became really aware that that was not me. I'm not my body. None of us are. We're not our body. We're not our emotions. We're not our thoughts. And all these things that I had believed were true or acted as if they were true weren't. I wasn't those things. And it was time to go back and reconnect fully with past lives that some of which I already knew about, and go back and study some postgrad stuff in art therapy, because I'd always been interested in that. I'd done quite a lot of that, but it was time to actually do it as part of my own journey, but also do it as part of helping other people, and really take on some new things that I became clear that this is what I came to do.
Wow. Thank you, Paulina. That's a very complete recount there of your experience. So I'd love to go back, Paulina, to your spirit. When you said that you came out of your body and then you travelled and you were outside the car, then you travelled again, you could look down on the village, you travelled again, you were out in the solar system. These bursts of, I'm going to call them travel again, just because that seems to be the appropriate word. What were they like? Was it that you thought about it and you were suddenly where you were, or do you remember traveling fast or slowly, or what was that like for you? It
was not a sense for me of, oh, I'm going to go further out or anything. It happened. It was quite a smooth transition. So it wasn't jerky. It was just, I was in the body, then I was out. Then I was further out. Then I was further out. Then I was further out. And it was like a smooth transition, but it was equally more and more expansive with everything that happened. There wasn't a sense of a connection to the body. Okay. I knew that the body was there. And when I talked about the sense of air coming, or the wind coming through, and said it took my breath away, it's interesting because I didn't feel any connection to my body. And yet it felt like, it's almost like that profound interconnectedness that we have with everything. So as the wind moves, of course it's going to move through me. And that was part of the profundity, I guess, of it, was that absolute awareness of deeply profound interconnectedness that we don't have a sense of when we're in a physical body.
So you had no control or ability to change what was happening to you?
I don't know, because I never tried to change anything that was happening. I never felt out of control. I felt in wonder.
Okay.
And I felt it was familiar, and it was territory that I knew very, very well. And perhaps if I explain something that happened many years later that helps to define that better, was I had done, when I came back to the UK, I began to wonder more about other people's stories from near death. That doesn't mean I hadn't been interested in it before, because I had, but I now wanted to see what people had experienced. And I discovered that in the research that was happening then, there were 5 categories of what people did or didn't do when they had a near-death experience. And the most profound one, or the most common ones that people know about, are going into the light or going into a tunnel. And the idea was that most people had one or other of those. Some people had 2. and then these 5 different stages. You may have all of them, or you may have 1 or 2, but they were fairly common ground. And in my research, I realized that I didn't come across anybody who had had these experiences with the 4 elements. So I was like, okay, there's something in there that's really important, but I'm not sure exactly what that is yet, except that I knew it changed me, it changed my frequencies, it also changed the work that I did and how I did it. And then many years later, I was at a Buddhist gathering, and one of the elder Buddhists was talking about how they navigate the afterlife and the bardo. And he was sharing information about how you move through the 4 elements. And now it was being translated, so I can't say exactly if what the translator said was what the monk said. But what I understood from it was that he was spending his lifetime and lifetimes practicing these techniques. And so I then had one of those aha moments that we get periodically, and particularly with the downloading of our experiences. We have aha moments at the beginning, but throughout the years, there's another, oh, okay, that's what that was. Oh, okay, that's what that was. And I had a real understanding then that I must have done that before in previous existences, whether I had done it as my soul or whether I had taught people how to do it or something, because it didn't feel out of control. It didn't feel like I wanted to go in a different direction. It felt like everything was just exactly as it was meant to be, and those 4 elements were helping release and let go of and surrender to losing the physical body, reconnecting with source, and returning home properly back to the stars.
So there was no element of fear at any point. What was going on in your mind? Because you talked about how you knew that the body was down there, you didn't feel any connection to the body. Did you know that you were dead, or did you know that you were outside of your body, that it was you? Did you have any fear?
I didn't have any fear at all. I didn't feel, I wasn't concerned about my body. I didn't feel disconnected to my body. Oh, I did feel disconnected to my body. But I didn't feel like, oh, that's their body and I don't have anything to do with it. It's just everything was so in the now. Everything was so deeply profound, and I felt so deeply connected to everything that, rather like I said earlier, if anybody asked me a question, I felt I knew the answer to that question. So nothing about it didn't make sense. And yet everything about it, on a human level, if somebody said, well, this is going to happen, I would have gone, oh, really? Okay. Like, that's not something I'm expecting. But on a soul level, on a connection to oneness level, there was nothing about it that was strange.
That's something that I hear quite often, actually. And even when you were talking before, you were trying to explain something and there weren't the words to explain it.
Yes.
I hear again and again how everything makes sense in the moment, in the experience. And then we come back and it's like we go through something which gives us this amnesia. We forget things and we know that we knew something, but we just can't remember what it was. And, you know, we experience this in our daily life down here. I have this all the time in life where I know I've forgotten something, but I don't know what I've forgotten. And I'm not talking about near-death experience. I'm just talking about everyday stuff. I've forgotten to do something, but because I can't remember what it is, that's the reason I've forgotten to do it. So I think it's just like that type of experience, maybe on, you know, times 100, times 1,000,000, this feeling. And people say it all the time. They have these amazing things where they know everything. They come back and they've experienced colors which you don't know if they don't exist here. And that's it. Some things don't exist in these experiences. So we can't bring them back and trying to make them fit into what we have down here in this realm.
That's correct. And the frequencies are different. And like if I talk about the blue eye that took me.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's it's interesting because I'm about to stumble over that because it's the closest representation I can get to it being a blue eye. And it was an eye, and it was blue, but the color blue is not a blue that you see on this dimension. And the eye is not an eye that you see in the closest thing I can get is there's these days on the internet you can find pictures of starbursts or nebula and things like that. It was definitely an eye, but it was also spacey in that it didn't have the definition of human animal eyes. But it was very, very blue, and I knew it was calling me. And I knew that it was also pulling me. And that was something else that I discovered at some point, not long after, was that whole idea of going out of the third eye and the crown chakra was also indicative to the thing that I found out later about the 4 elements was if you leave your body in that way, it's quite clean leaving. There's not a lot of, you're not bringing stuff through your body that's going to go through the astral realms. It starts to get a bit weird, I know, but it's the whole experience for me was a reminder of who I am. And I know that other people say that too. It's a reminder of who we are and who we are not. But it also enabled me to fully remember things about what I'd come to do, and also to trust my knowing that I had, because the veils didn't close in that way when I came in.
So when you came back, did you remember what you were meant to be, like why you're here, what you have to do? Did you remember some of that knowledge that you had when you're out there and you're saying, if anyone asked me any question, I'd know the answer? Or did all of that remain there when you came back into your body?
No, it came with me. And that was, I think, what the overself, oversoul thing was about, was the knowledge was there and the frequency in the body had changed to the degree that it could hold that. And the understanding of it never left. And so it also, I had, throughout my life, I had contact with like medium contact and telepathic contact with different beings, dead people and animals and trees and
before spirits, the experience. Before
it, yeah, right, I'd had that. But after the experience, it became it was like that became my everyday reality. It was my reality before, but then it became that was a part of what I came to do, was to have this experience and develop it. I'm in the Myers-Briggs test, I'm an INFP, an introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceptive. And so all of those 4 categories are really quite important to the work that I do, because part of the journey for the near-death for me was to understand that the people around me generally did not have that same sense of other or upstairs, let's say, as what I did. And I sometimes doubted it as a result. Or I didn't necessarily think I was crazy, but I knew it could sound crazy. So I didn't think I was crazy, but I knew it could sound crazy. But I doubted my own knowing simply because those people around me either weren't interested in it or didn't understand it, or you just know they didn't understand it. You don't have to say, you don't necessarily have to say to them, because you just know intuitively, because I had this INFP. Well, that became heightened in the frequencies. And so then it became a question of, well, clear your own debris, whatever that may be. Begin this absolute conscious journey. So it had to be conscious instead of unconscious. And so I was working already at a level of conscious, but I had to make it fully conscious, which is part of what those experiences were. And remember fully the journey of incarnations, past lives, future lives, present lives. Develop skills that I had forgotten, or remember those skills. So remembering that, remembering fully remembering things about Atlantis and Lemuria so that I could come into this incarnation and fully assist with the work that I came to do, which was things like helping to raise the divine feminine awareness, be part of the great spiritual awakening that is taking place, and help people understand that and help them remember that stuff, help them reconnect to spirit, to the absoluteness of that consciousness that we are all part of, that we forget, and also to take a conscious journey towards total soul recall, which for me means living in a physical form, remembering that we are having this experience as a volunteer, and that it's about returning back to source, returning home to consciousness with full liberation as a soul.
Interesting. I love what you just said. You said that we're here as a volunteer, and that really piqued my interest, because that is not something I've really considered too much about. It's not something we hear a lot about, but I guess if we choose to come to incarnate here, we are here on a voluntary basis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. Thank you, Paulina. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more outside of this interview, I think. Yeah, wow.
Well, it's interesting because there's a current paradigm. There's two paradigms actually currently running. And one is that we are caught in a prison planet and entrapped, and we can't get out of it. And the other one is, for me, it's like we're volunteers. So we choose to have a physical form, to have a 3D life as a human being, to grow as a soul. So we volunteer, and we choose the parents we're going to have, we choose the country we live in, we choose the friends. And also, I personally believe from my own experiences and my research that I've done, that I think in my case, and I actually suspect for others as well, the near-death experiences are like a trigger that we place into our subtle bodies before we incarnate.
So that we choose them before we come.
Yeah, so that we can fully manifest or fully understand what we came to do. And it may be that we came to be the best parent ever, whatever that means. And I don't mean about striving and being the best in the sense of left brain stuff. I mean just that was the way that we recognize that we love our children unconditionally, or whatever that means for us as a soul individual. So it's all very much about soul for me as well, that the soul embodiment is not about ego and it's not about the left brain. And if we volunteer and we recognize that we volunteer, then we're not victims to what is going on.
I love that. And that answers the question that I had for you, is why do you think this happened? But from the sounds of it, if I've got it right, you think this happened because this was your plan. You pre-programmed this into your lifetime before you came. And would you say it's a reminder?
In my case, it was to do two things. It was to remind me what I came to do in case I had forgotten, because I think there were certain aspects that I'd forgotten, but I also am aware that I needed my frequencies to open up fully. And that could have happened without the near death, but the soul works in mysterious ways, and so it puts it down to the nth degree if it can, and then it tweaks, because lifetimes change, don't they? And sometimes, like if we're meant to meet that person in our life, it may come down to the absolute conversation we're going to have with that person. That, if people meet at an airport or something, and then they have some kind of a conversation, and they leave, and then one person comes back to talk to them again. It's almost down to that finer detail, except that it can change in a moment. And so when I look back on my situation, the near-death experience that I had, it could have occurred in Israel, it could have occurred in South America, in Peru, and it could have occurred in Malta. And I'm clear on those three because those places have a resonance with the Great Awakening. Those places had a resonance with previous lives for me, what I came to do, and skill sets that I had in those lives. And the energy template in the earth, because that's another thing that I do. So I'm aware that I might be kind of sounding like I'm speaking all over the place, but for me, it's all connected.
Yeah, and that's fine. There's all sorts of different listeners who will resonate with some parts and not others. And I just love having the conversation and creating that space for the conversation around all of this. I want to ask you a really big question, Paulina. You mentioned just a little while back when we were talking about why you had it, you said you talked about how we program things into our life before we come here to learn and to grow and to develop while we're here. I get asked all the time, people write into me, a lot of the listeners want to know this question as well, and it keeps coming back, the same question, worded slightly different, is why do we need to grow? Why do we need to develop? Why do we need to have this human experience? What are your insights into that question?
Well, to not be glib, but my first response is to be, well, why not? And that's not to be glib and not to say, well, there's no other answer. But why? If we believe that this life, one life only, is all there is, then I can see why someone may say, well, why do we have to grow? If, however, we believe that we are souls, or that we are all consciousness experiencing itself, and consciousness wants to manifest itself in as many ways as possible for the experience. So as we grow consciousness, we feed back to consciousness. We're all on a journey to return back. And consciousness will want as many experiences as possible. And as a soul, the way to fully return home to source is to clear debris, grow, change, understand, learn, and become one with consciousness again. I don't know if that helps in that response.
Yeah, that does help. Thank you very much. And so if the point of it is to get back to consciousness, we come here to learn, to have these experiences, to get back there. Is that, because you hear all the time, we come here to grow. Is that the growth? Is that the end goal, to get back to consciousness?
Is there
a goal?
I mean, I think it's for the experience. I think the experience is the goal, not necessarily. I mean, to go home is great. In the experience of the near death, going home, it's familiar, it's beautiful, it's profound, and nothing else is like it. So there's a quest to return there, because it is familiar in all of our hearts, whether we forget it or not. We know it. The current world suggests that we're disconnected, but we know it, which is why I think people have that quest for that. But it's not a, well, I'm working hard in order to return home. It's a sense of everything that happens to us is an opportunity for growth and understanding. And when we get home, they don't talk about what you did was good or bad. It's a sense of, how was the ride? You had a ticket. Did you enjoy the ride? What did you learn? How was it for you? What was it like when you met that one true love that you thought that was going to happen? Did it work? How was it? What did you learn? All of those things, it means that the losses that we experience in our lives, the great profound joys that we have in our lives, the things that we do, they're all a part of how our soul and spirit is manifesting through us in every moment.
And through the choices that we've chosen for ourselves, pre-programmed in.
Well, I don't know that all the things are pre-programmed in. I think that the part of the journey is to understand that we have self-responsibility and personal responsibility.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it's not what happens to us. It's the choices we make around what happens to us. So, some like in the 1930s and 40s, there was an English flight pilot called Douglas Bader who was a bit reckless in a plane. Actually, he was often being told not to fly so crazily, and he had a very bad accident, and as a result of it, both of his legs were amputated. And he was determined he was going to walk again. And his journey, part of his reckless nature, I'm sure, was that nothing was going to stop him from walking again. So the prosthetics available at that time didn't enable that to happen. So part of his journey was not to sit at home and say, I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life and I can't do all these things. His journey was to say, this is what I want to do. How can I go about doing it? And I'm not saying that his choice was better than the person who may be in a wheelchair for the rest of their life. But how we respond to what happens to us is based on our own personality. And it's also based on whether we feel like this is part of our journey or how we do it. And so everything that happens to us, if we lose a loved one or a loved one dies or something traumatic happens to us, it's how we approach that and how we process that creates the difference in our lives and makes us feel more connected to source, more connected to spirit, or more disconnected.
Mm.
And in those shamanic processes, and I work as a shamanic practitioner, and often in shamanic earth-based cultures, you see that somebody had a great trauma in their life, and that was an awakening event, and that was the difference between, I guess, in a way, living a life unconsciously to living a life with connection and growth, and with growth that some of it is not easy. It challenges us.
Definitely, yeah.
It challenges us, but it's not meant to be. It's not a punishment. It's an opportunity for understanding and deeper growth and deeper soul connection.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Paulina. I'm so enjoying this conversation. I find it fascinating, the amount that we can discuss and all the different elements of it. I do, however, want to go back. You talked in your near-death experience. You were up. You said you were literally walking on the clouds. And I thought when you said that, I wonder if that's where we get that saying from. Yeah. However, that's not my question. And my question is, you were there, you were looking at these corridors, you could see these doors. Some were swinging, some were open, some were closed. You mentioned that you felt like they were part of the Akashic records or similar to that. Could you go towards them? Did you have any choice? Or were you taken back to your body before you could really get into the depth of that part of the experience?
I got into the depth of that part of the experience because I was able to choose which doors I could attune to. In fact, I felt it, in honesty, I feel like I tapped into all of them, because that awareness of them meant that just by being aware of it, I was tapping into that. The doors that were swinging felt to me like I had already accessed those. And the ones that were shut were not shut to me, but they were more, they could potentially be more enticing because they were shut. But by being close to them, by osmosis, and through that process of remembering, because that's, in the Akashic records, the ocean of consciousness for me is the Akashic records. It's like everything is contained in there that's ever happened in the universe.
Exactly.
The history of the planet, the real history of the planet, not what we read about in books, but the real history, and the real history of our species and how we got here and who created us and why we're here and all those things. That stuff is in there. So there was stuff that was relevant to me as a species, me in my past lives, and the collective of humanity. So it was a real mix of information relevant to me in my life and what I'd come to do, but also remembering all of that stuff to help with that, if that makes sense. So it was kind of individual but collective as well.
Was there an element of a life review? You talked about information by osmosis. So you knew what was behind the doors?
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking as we talk just to make sure, because I think so. That said, a bit like PMH Atwater, who does research of near-death stuff and has done some great stuff.
Amazing stuff.
And she talks about it can take 20 years or more to really understand what's happened a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience or other things that go on. And I think we have, immediately after it, we have a sense of something has happened, and during it. But these things take time. So that's why I was having another look. It's like, well, I got information for sure, but maybe there was stuff that I still haven't really fully integrated from that, because if everything is eternal and has no limit and no end, then the opportunity for constant growth is always there, and more understanding and deeper understanding. So yes, you know, so you go to a party and there's 50 people there, and you go, well, there were 50 people there, but then there's the layers of all those 50 different people, and then there's the color of the room, and then there's the way this looked, and the way, so there's always layers. And that's actually been really an important part of my mediumship and telepathic stuff, is exploring the layers, picking up the different layers. And in the myths and archetypes of the cultures that we live in and that have been imprinted in the earth, you know, how do we interact with the many different layers? So it's not about surface.
Yeah, I love that. That really resonates with me. That makes sense to me. I love how you describe the room, 50 people in the room, but there's all the individual stories, you know, the clothes they're wearing, the wallpaper, all sorts of different things. There's just so much to learn, isn't there? Yeah. And that kind of excites me, and I know it kind of overwhelms me at the same time. So I think we just have to relax and go with it, I suppose. Go with our journey. Yeah. Learn what we can and not get overwhelmed by that, because I think, you know, again, I get asked the question, can we fail this lifetime? Why do we have so many lifetimes? Do we have to achieve everything that's in front of us in this lifetime?
My sense around that is there is no pass or fail.
Yeah.
There is only experience that we learn and grow with. And the pass or fail is a human dynamic. And it's a left brain dynamic as well. You know, we go through school, which is, it's changing. And there's different kinds of schools to mainstream education. But like probably when you and I went to school, there wasn't really a sense of the different ways that people learn information. It was very much about rote learning, get the information into them, do all that. That's changed over the last 20 odd years, you know, of people learning that we learn. Some people learn visually, some people are audio, they hear things, and some people are kinesthetic. They need to have the practice. You know, if you're going to fix a car, you need to know that's how you pick out an engine, that's how you do a dipstick. You know, you have to actually physically do it to take the information in. So we're changing, but the mainstream tends to be you either pass or you fail. You succeed or you don't, and not about the experience of life itself. And that's a really tricky one for us as a human species that maintains that separation from source and that disconnect, because we worry about things that are actually not relevant and not important. And we can't fail at anything, because there is that judgment is a human dynamic.
Wow, that is so great to hear, isn't it? So relieving. We can't fail at anything.
No.
I love that.
We just take the sweet and we suck it and see.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, you go, oh, I don't think I'll have more of that, thank you.
Yeah, it's
or
brilliant.
I love that one, give me more of that, you know. But that's also that spiritual glamour too, isn't it? You know, a lot of people on the spiritual path get very connected to glamour, isn't it? That whole I'm so special, I'm so or spirituality is so important. And look, for me, spirituality is everything for me. It's about what I've come to do, that journey. But it's not glamorous.
Yeah.
You know, it's not glamorous. If you can turn water into wine, there's a skill and a technique to that. And it can seem glamorous and miraculous and magical when we don't understand how we're doing it. But it's not a glamorous life.
So tell us a little bit about that, Paulina. What are you up to today? What is life like for you today?
Well, I continue with my big thing is really like in this awakening, what's happening? How do we help ourselves and help each other come together in that recognition that we are not our bodies, we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions. And this is part of that great awakening, is remembering who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. And so for me, a big part of that has been the mediumship and the telepathic sense of that. So I work with people, and help dead people contact me a lot, actually, but I work with people to help them experience their own process of dying, and maybe people who've passed over and they want to connect with them, help people navigate the afterlife, and do readings and things for people, and healing, shamanic practitioner work. But the biggest thing, or the overriding thing, is this idea of the raising awareness of the divine feminine consciousness is that thing that's not about pass or fail. It's about all is now, all is one. We are all interconnected. We have all come together for this journey. And in the earth herself is all the history of everything that's ever happened here. So I work with helping people to understand how to connect with the living beings, like trees and plants and divas and rocks and stones and cosmic energies and angels and crop circles and ley lines, and in the earth is all there's geomythic templates, and these geomythic templates really hold the history of what's happened here. So we see them as archetypal or mythical stories, but in the many layers of them, we can see that they actually share the history of everything that's happened here. And many sacred sites were built on those places. And so by exploring sacred sites and the energy templates, you start to understand a deeper level of who we are, but also another way of returning back to source, because it's always about returning back to source. And so, I wrote the book Isis about my interactions in Malta. I've got something else I'm writing about my own journey and more of those experiences, so people can understand perhaps a bit more about what I'm talking about. But I also have a lot of contact experiences, and that's a bit woo-woo as well for people. But I had that as a child, and I've had that strongly since the near-death experience. And that's because in the work that I do, I get to communicate with beings from the Pleiades. I get to communicate with beings from Sirius. I get to communicate with cosmic beings. And so something that I did in the last few months is wrote a chapter for a book, which I'm really interested in because, as I said earlier, when near-death experiences were first being researched and explored, there were categories of was it real, what happened, there was the tunnel, there was the lights, there were different things that took place. And if your near-death experience didn't fit that category, then it ruffled feathers. But it wasn't really about consciousness itself. And now researchers into contact experiences, near-death, and all of those sorts of things are starting to register that it's actually about consciousness. So I wrote this thing about some of my contact experiences and how they are cumulative over this life and over other lifetimes, that are all about responding and returning back to consciousness. And so for me, it's always the same thing, it just manifests differently. I work with people with art therapy. I help people clear houses, heal land. Whatever I can do and whatever within my skill sets, I will participate and help and share. So if I need to speak somewhere, I will, or if and I do ceremony, and so I work a lot with the 4 directions, which is the 4 elements, which is that back to the earth stuff again. So it's all, for me, it's all interconnected. And I don't know if in your life this happens for you, but within the different things that you do, you may have a period of time where you spend more time doing that than you do something else for a while. And then it swings around and you do something else. That's what happens in our life, isn't it? We go okay, well, at the moment I'm spending a lot of time writing, or I'm spending a lot of time reading, or I'm spending a lot of time like researching rather than reading. So and sometimes it's like a lot of art therapy clients are coming, or a lot of mediumship is happening. So it's all interconnected, and it's really hard to separate.
Definitely. And I do definitely experience that in my own life. Part of that is probably my personality, that I don't like to get, I guess, tied down to one thing, and I like to have my finger in a whole lot of different activities and pies and different things that are going on. But I hear this more and more about how people are feeling led to be spread. It's not necessarily thinner, but just to be involved in different projects all at the same time, and just to trust the process as well, that we do the right thing at the right time, it helps the right people, that we're here to be of service. So Paulina, thank you so much. You've shared so much with us today. You talk about how it's quite woo. You've mentioned that a couple of times. It is, but also these woo topics are coming to me more and more and more. So I so greatly appreciate everything you've shared. I feel like I've learned quite a lot just chatting with you today, and I know that there's more conversation that we will have.
Yeah.
You are doing amazing things. We will put all of your details, your contact details, into the show notes so people can get in touch with you if they want to have a reading or learn more about what you're doing, or if they have questions, they can write into me, write into you. But I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on and sharing your wealth of knowledge and everything that you've had in your life before, during, and after your experience.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you to have me on, and very kind of you to listen too. And I appreciate it. And if people contact me, I will always do my best to be in service. So thank you very much, and I appreciate that what you're doing is sharing information, helping people share information, but also sharing information in a way that was triggered by your own experiences.
Brilliant. Paulina Howfield, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Don't forget you can join the free online community over at www.letstalkneardeath.com, and I look forward to sharing another episode with you soon.